delay a little bit, but
No, we're on time.
okay. Again, we're on time. Great. The new on time, which starts right now.
You moderate your own.
What we are going to do in the next 1.5 hours will be a little bit. No, I did it. Maybe in several ways a little bit bold. Up until now, we listened to many experiences and to many reports of all of you about. You were reporting about your experiences, about some things that you established, and so on. And I'm very glad that we had the opportunity to listen to the students here in the last session, because this is a wonderful transition to this section that we will have now, because we will try to practice. We try to go into I won't present to you what we did last summer in Wittenberg, but I will try that we share this experience by exercising, by practicing it.
You reenact it.
We reenact it, yes, but not the Wittenberg. It's different. What did we do? We read some texts of the patriarch story of the book of Genesis that was already mentioned because of its particular standing within the Bible, and we considered it as a common basis. And this is the next bold thing, maybe, because we were both Jews and Christians, and of course for us the Old Testament, the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible is a common basis. But we are not only Jews and Christians here. So we will try and transcend our Wittenberg program. Brahmachari suggested a text of the Bhagavad Gita, which we try to discuss in a similar way that we did it in Wittenberg. And we will try, if it works, with other texts beside the Torah, if it could work as a program, a real interfaith program. So this is an experience. We don't know what will happen, but the major thing that I want to say, I want to start with a quote from Martin Luther. When we went to Wittenberg last year, we did what he recommended the Christians at least to do. Go and read the Bible. That's what we were doing. We read the Bible together. And we did a very similar thing that the Bereshit program here is doing. We were discussing, listening to each other, bringing in our perspectives on the text and enriching each other. And it worked very well too. And something happened. Maybe, like Martin Luther said, he said, Holy Scripture is like a herb. The more you rub it, the more it scents. And maybe let's just go into it. The way we did it was we started reading by reading, verse by verse. Each of us will read one verse in his or her preferred language. We have this Genesis text here in 3 different languages, and we read it several times so that each of us has read at least one verse. So, will you begin, Rav Shabtai?
Very happy.
And then, Irina, we'll continue and so on.
ויהי כל הארץ שפה אחת ודברים אחדים.
And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there.
And they said one to another, Go to, let us make brick, and burn them thoroughly. They had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar.
ויאמרו הבא נבנה לנו עיר ומגדל וראשו בשמיים ונעשה לנו שם פן נפוץ על פני כל הארץ.
And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men builded.
And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language. And this they begin to do. And now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do.
Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech.
So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city.
Δια τούτο εκκλήθη το όνομα αυτής σύγχυσης, ότι εκεί συνέχεια Κύριος τα χείλη πάσης της γης, και εκείθεν διέσπηρεν αυτούς Κύριος επιπρόσωπο πάσης της γης.
And the whole earth was of one language and of one speech.
No.
Are we going to keep going?
Yeah.
Yes.
You're good.
Number 2, and it came to pass.
And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there.
And they said to one another, Let us go to, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar.
And they said, Go to, let us build a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth.
And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the children of men builded.
And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, and they all have one language. And this they begin to do. And now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do.
Wohlauf, lasst uns herniederfahren und ihre Sprache daselbst verwirren, dass keiner des anderen Sprache verstehe. The last 2 verses we...
Okay. ויפץ השם אותם משם על פני כל הארץ, ויחדלו לבנות העיר.
Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth. And from hence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth.
So thank you very much. We have the one language here in this text, but whereas we consider we are looking for one language, for one common ground that we can talk to each other about meaningful things, about meaningful texts, about religion, about faith. Here we do have at least an ambivalent view on the one language. So I wondered if there is a relation between the one language of this story and the one language that we are looking for. And when I look to the Hebrew of the first verse, it is translated in English and in German as well, of one language and of one speech.
It's just, he didn't know the meaning.
Exactly.
It's a way out of, they don't understand what's talking, so they avoid it.
So,
what's the problem?
The problem, so maybe, should I explain or will you explain?
Yeah.
I explain the problem as I see it.
Maybe.
Maybe.
Food already.
Yes. The interesting thing is that you have actually not one speech in the Hebrew. It is dvarim achadim, which means actually, literally, few words.
No, achadim here could mean one. Achadim could be many, several. Echad is one.
Yes,
but Yud Mem means plural. But
I know,
but it also could be an adjective, meaning dvarim that are one. But since the adjective, like you say, yafeh, yafim, so they're thing of ones. If I would translate it very literally, it will be dvarim could be things, right? Could be ideas, could be it relates to content anyway, not to the words, but to the content. Achadim means they possess the quality of oneness.
Well, similar meanings.
Similar meaning.
Okay. Yeah, that would be sort of my.
Here is the expert.
Similar meanings. So I mean, you hear a word and you think you know what it means. I mean, you have an idea of what it means, and that's what people have in common typically when they use the same language. So it's not about grammar or syntax, but
So if the expert agrees with me, dvarim achadim means agreement on the content, not only the speech. Okay. But it's not. You didn't mean Einsprach.
No, it's not. It's not sort of a lingua franca or sort of a Desperanto kind of situation.
Right,
That's
exactly.
not what it is. I mean, not excluded, but that's not the point of it.
Right.
So, actually, what is bad in this story? I mean, they have one language, and they tried to they intended similar things. They said, okay, let's start a project together. I mean, we are starting a project together as well.
Are you saying that it doesn't really mean one word or one language, but one agreement, as it were?
The second.
So they came to an agreement.
The second. There are two idioms there.
Yeah.
One language, שפה אחת, ודברים אחדים. There are 4 words there. שפה אחת, like it was said to one language. דברים אחדים was mistakenly translated as one speech. I'm sorry to say mistaken, but
yeah.
Also in the Septuagint it's like this, but I don't think it's true.
Could you say intent?
Yeah.
One intent?
Yes, exactly. That's what I think it was. They
one intent, similar intent, right? Exactly. But it doesn't relate to the language. No.
The second.
Exactly. It relates to the idea, to the meaning.
The interesting thing is, we actually think that something good is happening. I mean, we all were glad if all our nations would intend the same or intend similar things, and we experience the contrary. I mean, what is bad? Why did this have to change?
May I have something? I have. It's a spoiler. Tomorrow I'm going to talk about it, but in another. But the thing is, if anyone that I was introduced to Wittgenstein's pretty recently, so I still remember the way that he described the problem of having one language or to understand each other. And the easiest thing to understand each other is if we have rules, if we have a project. And we say, listen, a brick is this size, so 2.5 inches or 5 inches or 3 inches, that's a brick. Now, everyone knows what a brick is. So if I ask you for a brick, you know exactly what I mean. If I say, this is one layer, so this is one layer. The second one is the next layer. And the next layer has to be recessed, like a tenth of an inch inside. So we know what we are talking about. So one language that relates to a project is not really one language. It is only, we made rules as far as the building project goes, but it's not really one language. But we delude ourselves that it's really one language. It's really a delusion. Because we don't really understand each other. We have a project and we can work together to build the project, but we don't really have one language. If I ask you, how do you feel today? And you begin to tell me and say, oh, what. When I ask you, how do you feel, I didn't mean to tell me how do you feel. They just wanted to be polite to you. And this understanding does not come with building a project, with understanding what a brick is and what the layer is. This is something else, some different kind of understanding. So they thought they have one language because they had one project, but they didn't really have one language because they didn't really understand each other.
The Greek word that's used can mean of consent.
Exactly.
One expression of consent, even though it can also mean of one voice. But it depends how you understand it.
But one voice is also consent, no?
The word phony can mean a language. Or that could be glossa, but it's not. It would be a harmony or consent or expression.
Yes. Andreas and Grant?
One thing that I think is important about this text is its context. If you come out of Genesis 10, so the chapter that comes right before that, it's the so-called Table of Nations, a long and very boring list of nations and territories that filled the earth that God created. In a sense, Genesis 1 and 10 go together because what God intends in Genesis 1, that everything is fruitful and multiplies, happens in 10. And there the language is such that all these different nations have different ethnic identities and they have different languages. So Genesis 10 starts with the assumption there are different languages, and that's good. That's the intention of the Creator. And now 11 comes in, 1 through 9, and makes a slightly different point and plays with that idea to some extent. Now what does that mean? Kind of, do they understand each other? If so, how so? Kind of, what can they do together? I mean, all of this sort of now gets under, discussion again. And
so where do you see the change?
Well, and to some extent, 11 almost reverses the situation. I mean, kind of at the end of this story.
I'm talking about the end of the story.
At the end of the story, we are back to Genesis 10. We have multiple nations and we have multiple languages. But this text is trying to explain how that happened. And then, kind of we get a different argument. Genesis 10 would say God did it somehow. That's the way it developed. 11 says, no, it's not a natural thing, but that had to be negotiated. And it goes through this drama of people trying to cling together in one place, which is not what they should do, because God wants them to, fill the earth to some extent. And so there's that fight over, or at least struggle over, what human beings are supposed to be, one in one place, or sort of a multiplicity. And they could still understand each other. I mean, even at the end of 11, it's clear, kind of just multiple languages doesn't mean misunderstanding. We can still understand each other.
So let us do some.
But these are just some I mean, something
first,
like that.
First, Grant wanted to say something.
Yes.
No, I was just looking at, there's a website that has 26 different translations in English of the text. And it was just interesting that I was looking at how 26 different English translations have rendered, I guess the phrase is Devarim Achadim.
Right.
And none of them are as rich as what people in this room have been saying. They just translate it as same words, one speech, common vocabulary, a language everyone spoke, same words. That's the extent of the richness of the 26 common English translations of Devarim Achadim. So anyway, I like what you're all saying better.
Well, you have to explain it. The translation is too simple.
Ricardo?
Right.
Ricardo?
I also...
pardon, did you also wanted to mention something, John? No, okay. Ricardo.
The word for name Greek can mean not only the utterance of a sound, but can mean like something more or less like intentional or even bragging. Like they have as a whole, as if they would have a whole intention, idea, going towards something.
I mean,
just one comment to Andreas, do some reverse engineering. Now we know that once with German language, Roman languages, when people split, when people go away, they mutate and develop just like, like people mutate and develop in different environments. This is a natural process. So when you do reverse engineer, when you reverse engineer to the verse, you mean that that's what God did at that time, caused languages to be mutated?
Well, in Genesis 10, yes. I mean, the table of nations. I mean, because it's part of creation that, they diversify, they go out.
This is 10, but here.
10, I mean, this is a different story because, it's intriguing in so many levels. First of all, there's, of course, human beings who, out of anxiety, want to cling together. I mean, there's this word nafutz. They don't want to be, spread out all over the world because in Hebrew that's something that suggests danger. Empires do that. They colonize, exile people, kind of spread them all. So there's something dangerous about that, and that's what they fear, And then on the other hand, there's God who wants to push them out. So there's a genuine conflict of interests between what humans want and what God wants, and that's sort of the drama that unfolds in this story. In my reading.
I was just looking at the Christian Standard Bible. This said the whole earth had the same language and vocabulary, which adds a little different dimension to it.
If you use the devarim as words as in a dictionary, then that's what you get.
But a little different variation.
But still, you already mentioned Genesis 10 and spoiled something that I wanted to add.
So we erase it.
No. It's perfect. Because it leads me to the question, what actually wants this story to tell me? I mean, we already know there are different languages, and in the end of the story we have different languages again.
No, we don't. Not really, because what happens at the end is not that God creates multiple languages. The one thing that God does, the word balal in Hebrew means to stir. You do that with soup, you do that with oil, or these kinds of things.
It's not confound, right? Confound is also not the word.
Not quite.
It's mixed.
It's mixing, so kind of the Devarim Ahadim, that doesn't work anymore. So there's no understanding, no consensus of what these words mean, and that's enough so that people can't communicate anymore, and then they go out. But that story in and of itself doesn't say that there are multiple languages. I mean, that's 10. So there's, but anyway.
We're looking for Russian.
Well, you would come from the Mesoamerican.
My reading.
Is there significance to the fact you brought up the lineage happening before, not lineage, but the various peoples coming before that? Is there significance to the fact that right after that you go right back to the same?
Yeah, I mean, this is a little episode in the program, but you would probably want to do something that's not just exegesis here, but so.
We just want to go into the text and ask for the meaning. What is this one language good for, and is this something we should go for
or avoid?
John?
It's not one speech, but more of a sense of one consent.
Pardon?
Can you the whole earth, all the people of one language and with one sort of purpose? What I hear is collective human action.
Collective human?
Collective human agency. People have a common purpose to act together.
Mm-hmm.
And the collective human agency seems to provide a place of stability so people don't get scattered. And the place of stability is to build a city. And the city requires human technique. It requires human craft. And it requires human craft in an integrated way. Not everybody can do one thing. There has to be a division of labor, a division of skills that have to be coordinated together.
Mm-hmm.
So far, so good. So the one city, it seems to be to provide a space, a home, to keep them from being scattered. It represents human creativity. But then the tower which reaches up to heaven, and I guess the question is, and what's going to be the center of all of this activity? If it reaches up to heaven, what's it reaching to?
we have Irina and then Rolly?
Actually, I kind of wanted to bounce it off Nikita and see what he thinks, because in the Russian translation, which would inevitably come from Greek, says one tongue and one language or speech.
What?
One tongue, like a English tongue, and one speech or vocabulary, which may come from the Masoretic text, but again, I would want to bounce it off.
The word for tongue is not the one here.
And that's what I'm saying. It's interesting why it is used that way. So it's probably not an accurate translation.
It's close to the Hebrew. I mean, tongue is, so Safal would be lips, and then tongue would be the next best thing.
And if I may say something, in translations, just a second, in translations they tend, when you see something replicating, so you take the replication to your own language. But it's not true. It's a terrible thing to do. It's like it's betraying the text. You see, two things that come together, so you try to give it a color. You don't want to repeat yourself. Right. So you say one tongue and one language, but it's nothing.
Okay. Rolly and then John.
When I read this, and I try to zoom out of the part that grabs me, the part about the language, I get the message of some sort of unity, or some sort of collective agency or collective identity, as was said. And then, exactly as was mentioned, the issue of the city starts off with this notion of some kind of unity, but then for some reason that's not enough. And then they say the entire earth is one language and one so forth. And okay, now we need one city, but we're already one. So, but we need to go ahead and do something further than that. And for me, that emphasizes the question of John is, where are they going with this? Mm-hmm. That's part, I was just picking up of it.
Thank you. John?
If we look at this and we see the contrast between Babel and Pentecost in Acts 2, we see here there's one language that results in no understanding. But in Pentecost, they're speaking many languages, and it brings understanding to people from different perspectives. So in that sense, having just one language, trying to find the same intent is limiting. But when we allow the expressions in multiple languages, we bring greater understanding.
And why is that?
That's just the contrast of the two texts. I would say anthropologically, each culture has their own particular filter. It has their own richness of understanding. And so by allowing those different voices to speak, then others can learn from those expressions that were filtered out in their own language, their own frame of reference.
So do you think that this is what God enabled throughout this story?
Yeah, it's interesting to say it that way, because really in Babel, God intervenes, and because that one language that was limiting, he confuses it. But what empowers the understanding in the Pentecost story is God himself. So God is inspiring these understandings. I hear everyone speaking the wonderful works of God in my own language. So, yeah, God is the actor.
So to build on that, what is the etymology of Babel or Babel? Babel is like the gate to God. That's what Babel stands for. So here are these, to build on his contrast, you have people deciding on their own initiative that they want to open the gate to God and accomplish this, but no, it has to be, this would be a good kind of Christian interpretation where you emphasize God's initiative rather than human initiative, we could spin this around and say, aha, in Pentecost, it was the divine initiative that accomplished one language and one understanding, where human aspiration in Bob L failed. How's that for fun?
I wish that there will be a mention of Bab in the Bible. I don't know. Bab is Arabic for a gate.
Right.
I wish I could remember anything in the Bible meaning Bab is a gateway, and I cannot find out. I cannot find anything like this. You know, Andreas?
I mean, Bab's also, it's Akkadian. I mean, it's not
Is what?
It's Akkadian.
Sure,
so
but
comes
is
from
it,
that,
of course, but you know in the Bible anything like this?
No, not really. You know, I mean, there's never, I mean, Babylon, of course, there are multiple reference texts, but there's never an etymology given. I mean, so this is the one, and it goes back to this root that has a Beit Lamed Lamed, so it doesn't have anything to do with the Bab Eli, sort of the gate to the gods. It's really, they explain it with, this is the place where God did this here with the words and the language. So in a sense they avoid that play with, the gate of heaven. That's not so much here the emphasis.
I actually recently heard from Yuda, so one of the archaeologists working in the journal, also very deeply into Tanakh. He was actually going very much in that direction. He says that this sentence here is very much aware of the play on words. It's almost there's a little bit of comedy here. There's fun. He's actually claiming this as a...
Yeah, maybe not.
Meaning it's a co-text that exists in the context where these words were spoken. So it's not about finding whether there's a parallel within the Bible. It's from an era when those were the words spoken.
Oh, really? That's a text from the Greek era or something?
I know.
So, I suppose I have the outsider's point. I can take the outsider's route on this one, right? If I were to approach this and read this for what it is, for me it's a lovely piece of text, and it is a very old, ancient piece of text, and it's wonderful, and it has its merits therein. But obviously, for those who are believers, they might take this a lot more seriously than I would take it. Especially because I'm one of those people who tries. I like genetics, I like paleogenetics, I like looking at the development of human race through the genetic history that we can look at.
The tree of life.
Well, the tree of life, definitely. And so we know that from the earliest that man has been mixed with other types of hominids. It's not just Homo sapiens, we are Neanderthals, Denisovans, Heidelbergensis, etc., all together. This is who we are. And we know that we migrated at different times, and so would have had different languages at those different times. So, looking at this, with that kind of knowledge in my background, doesn't mean I'm going to look at this and discount this. Because what I see from this is the kind of statement that says, well, sure, there are many languages, but if there is one purpose, if there is a specific purpose, you do generate, as humans, language that will work in the office, so that you get the job done. And that's what I can take away from this. I wonder if it is just like all of us who speak a different language as our native language, learning English, so that we can work in the world. And then whenever we have our little, we say a word that doesn't mean the word that has the same connotations in the English that is spoken at the table, and then we have a little learning moment. Is that the kind of language that would be helpful in an interfaith? And so the word we use is convention. So there's a conventional agreement in the language that is used to make sure the job gets done. And if we treat interfaith as a project, is coming up with a language that can serve as the method of getting things done a good idea?
the phrase that says, "Let us make us a name," is rather ambiguous, because it give ourselves a name or let us produce a name for something else. And when I'm reading this, and I apologize for too much Iliadics in here, but in the sacred and the profane, when he goes through various cultures, nomadic cultures tend to carry the center of the world with them, whether it's a log or something else. The log is what gives access to the gods. In the same way, the altar is what gives access to God. And the tower here seems to play that kind of access, the center of the world, around the city. But the name also has power in many ancient cultures. So it's the idea that we need to come together. We need to make ourselves a name. Is it a name for us or a name to call on with the center of the world? And what's interesting is God's response to it, which reminds me of what he says. When Adam and Eve eat the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, it's, they bought into this idea that they're going to become gods without gods. And when they eat of it, he says, now they're going to become like gods. And it's going to be a catastrophe, so we have to stop them. And there seems to be something like that here. There's this collective prospect of, in a sense, wanting to get access to the gods, the center of the world. The question is who is the name for? Does the name yield a power which collectively now God is looking at it with somewhat the same he said with Adam and Eve. Once they accomplish this, they're going to be able to do whatever they want. And if in the background you think whatever they want includes all the ways in which human beings can go astray, then it seems to be the sense that this one language isn't the problem so much, is this common purpose, is put together to something which can lead not necessarily to a life which was focused on God, but to the center of the earth. It points somewhere else that could lead to chaos. But then the question again is, let us make for ourselves a name for ourselves, or a name to call on.
Chantal, you want to
Yes,
continue?
Project and create language, I think only if you define the parameters of the project. So if you know how to build a tower, then you can describe the bricks and you make a name for them. It's very difficult when you have a project like Interfaith to create language like that. The language will then develop together with the project. But there is one more point. Another point, if you already talked about genetics and the development of humankind, I just want to mention that the greatest human character is to think of things that don't exist and share them, like intersubjectivity. It's amazing. We have something that does not exist. We have a vision, and how can we share the vision? So to describe a brick and to describe a camera, describe a table, and have one word for it, it's not such a great achievement. The achievement is to share a vision and use the language to bring the vision to fruition. This, I think, is the human gift. And what I doubt here, that there is a counter-evolutionary process here. There is a total intersubjectivity. There is an agreement, and then it scatters. Then it gets mixed and scattered. Meaning part of the vision goes, they go arise, the vision gets lost, and so from one agreement it becomes, fights and cults, and so if you want to reconstruct, maybe you should tell yourself, reverse engineering, once we were one. So now we are scattered because God scattered us. Let us go, and this is the Pentecost, let us go and remember that we were once one. We can do the intersubjective process, bring it back to its origin.
Andreas, yes?
This is such a great text, and in combination with Genesis 2 and 3, what you just mentioned, it's definitely there. Because on the Christian side, obviously these are texts that have a lot to do with the dogma about human sin and even original sin. So this is very much at the heart of a very contested, shall we say, dogma, which makes this very interesting. And Christians typically have a problem because this text doesn't put God in a particularly good role. I mean, this is not a God who is as sovereign as, for example, in Genesis 1. I mean, that's a deeply kind of suspicious God. You know, what humans could do, you know, kind of thinks about that out loud, you know. So you see a very human God in heaven who walks down that tower to look around, you know, kind of all of it. These are very anthropomorphic images. So it's more like a Greek drama almost where we are, you know, kind of the plot. So, you know, I don't think this is about, you know, what human beings could do to offend God. I mean, this is not about that. And the humans, they never say we want to be like God. You know, I mean, they never ever say that. They don't even aspire to that. They simply say we want a name for ourselves. Well, because that's what you have to have. If you're a human being, if you're a nation, you better have a name. I mean, otherwise you don't exist. So that in and of itself is not a sinful thing to aspire to. The key, in a sense, that sort of unhinges the text is that interpretation of the materials. I mean, it's interesting in verse 3 that the text needs to say, and they had brick for stone and slime, bad translation, they had for mortar. You know, you would ask yourself, why would they have to explain something like that?
Totally technical.
No, it's not technical. I don't think it's technical, because when they say brick for stone, suddenly you have brick. So where do they use brick in the Hebrew Bible? Well, that's, for example, in Egypt. You know, kind of that's how they build other people's empires. So in a sense, this is slave work, what they do. You know, you don't do these mega projects. I mean, this is not, I mean, nations like Egypt and Babylon and Assyrians, they do that kind of stuff, you know. But this is not the model. I think that's pretty much what the text wants to say, you know, kind of free people, creatures of God, that don't do that. You know, they do their own thing. They are, you know, they multiply. You know, kind of there's lots of diversity and not the one empire, and everything that contributes to that. I mean, that's sort of my reading out of this. So God is liberating them in a sense. You kind of don't do that empire. You know, just go out. You know, be many, do your own thing out there. Have your languages. It's all good. You know.
Okay, how do you read this, Abraham?
Just a small remark. I said it also in Wittenberg. We spoke about the change of Abraham's name. So I think the translation for Shem here is wrong. I think the meaning is purpose, not change the calling someone for his name. Shem is also purpose.
Can you raise the voices?
Okay, I said that Shem here means purpose, and it refers to the tower, to the project that they were endeavoring. So it says that let's make us a project that connects us all. That's the meaning of the verse in 5. And that's the name is purpose.
Okay, let's make us a project. So this is what we all of us are discussing these days. Let's make us a project, and what is the thing that we can achieve with that, and what is maybe, is there any danger or something like that that's indicated by the story?
At least one thing, one thing you can say, that this project started bottom up. It's not the king said, now we are doing it. It said, "Vayomru ish el re'ehu," and they said one to another. Again, one, I don't know, it's really, the translation is really not so good. Ish el re'ehu really means bottom up. I mean, a single person told another person, his friend, his equal. Re'ehu is an equal. So it was not a decision that started from the top, let's have a project. Someone conceived of the project. It's some sort of a project that grew from grassroots. And this is very rare. It's really, I find this is the amazing point. When you think about an extraordinary structure, who dreams about it? Someone that is a dictator, a president, they want to build very high towers. This is always Taj Mahal was built by a Raja. It's not something that, people think we have nothing better to do, let us go together, and like Andreas says, we who are the slaves? We are the slaves. We have to make bricks and millions of bricks to make a tower like this. So it started as initially one person told his friend, it will be a good idea to do this. And it was so powerful, such a powerful desire, that everyone shared the vision and they decided to make a tower. I find it very strange.
Well, I mean, to follow up on that, I would say this is a text, you could read it in the sense as, encouraging us to find good projects. I mean, the tower may not have been the best project, because, that's what people do that we don't like. I mean, Assyrians, Babylonians. But this Ish El Re'ehu at the beginning, let's do something together, as sort of the starting point. I mean, that could have developed differently. And I mean, so in a sense, it's the first few verses that are interesting for our project, not so much the latter part, I think.
Let me just add one thing. What I found interesting is that they wanted to build a tower and they wanted to build a city. And
city and a tower.
Yes, a city and a tower. Okay, and the city can also be a place of very many opportunities, a place where people can encounter. So for me, the city is a symbol for the potential, the positive potential that lies within us. Maybe that's what we can do together.
Can I say something?
Yes.
I'm totally out of this already. Let me just bring a completely different point of view. If I were going to read this as a Buddhist text, I would say that the people came together and came up with a constructed idea. They were going to construct something out of their own imagination. And that which was holy called and said, wait a minute, these are just your ideas. You're constructing something. And returned them to the earth, which is organic, which is resting in what is here, and come together on the earth so that we can grow something together organically.
I love that.
That would be my...
It's great.
Great.
Thank you. So we have Brahmachari and we have Elisa.
That's a very good way of looking at it. Kind of turns on the head what I was about to say. But I'll say it anyway for its comic value. If we're talking about coming together and building something, what we are assuming is that everybody does not have the same capabilities or talents. And in building a city together or building a tower together, what you're trying to do is, whether the city or the tower is the best one, is trying to find something that leverages the best of every person in accordance with what they're good at. So you get the carpenters to do the carpentry stuff, the mathematicians to do the measure, whatever it is. You're giving a collective a project to do that is a collective project that lets them do what they love and what they're good at individually.
Sounds like Adam Smith.
Sounds
like Adam Smith. The economy, the hidden hand that will, you can really, according to the interpretation, you can put that capitalist economy in this thing.
So let us hear.
I'm not sure what the point of this will be, but I'm going to say it anyway. While we're reading this, I'm not sure. Tell me if there are comparisons in either rabbinic literature or in Christian literature between the Tower of Babel and Mitzrayim and like the slavery in Egypt. But it just reminded me while I was reading this that what were they doing at Tower of Babel? There was something that was ground up. They all decided kind of amongst themselves according to this reading, and they were taking bricks and making bricks and building things with bricks and building up, big towers and everything that was going towards not such great goal is our assumption here, since God wanted to bring it down. And then in Egypt, what is the defining job that they had is
that we're going towards not a great goal, is going towards the goal of somebody who saw himself almost as a god. And many times the Tower of Babel story is read as people trying to reach God or beat God or somehow get on that level which is like beyond our humanity. And so I'm just thinking about that kind of divine irony that in Babel they sided amongst themselves. Is emphasized in this text. They were building, they were making bricks, and they were making them very dry and very hard. They were making them really well to build a structure that had some type of offensive goal to God, and then they spend hundreds of years being slaves, being told by someone who thinks that he's God to make bricks and to build these structures for him and for his city. I thought that was kind of ironic, and it's just hard for us to think, we see a story like this, and we see everybody has one language, and everybody's working together, and they're working on a project, and that sounds great. And then you see that it's bad, and then it turns out badly. And it's very hard to tell, like, when we're doing something that is positive by coming together, like in a group like this, in a conference like this, versus when coming together is going towards not the best goal. And so, many times people think, okay, we came together, we had a conference, we all talked, okay, great. No point is coming together and talking and understanding each other under one language. But we really have to examine what is our goal, what are we trying to do here. And sorry, there's a lot of thoughts going on here. There's one last thing. When Keitha spoke about good religion and bad religion, about something that makes you feel good, it's self-serving versus being dedicated to the greater goal or to God and beyond ourselves, it's reminded me of this. So also at Tower of Babel and also in our conference, that we have to really think about, are we coming here just to come together, just to have one language, just to do joint projects like what's happening at Tower of Babel because it feels good and we like the idea, I had this nice conference with all these different people, now I understand them, they understand me, and I don't hate them, they don't hate me. No, that's so nice, that's so nice. I did this thing in Israel and tell everybody, put it on our resume, and this is amazing interfaith thing that we did. Or are we going to come out of it with something? Are we going to do something with it? Are we going to, someone use it towards a greater goal? And it's just kind of a plug for Rav Shabtai here wants to make sure that we come out with something, to continue with the collaboration. But really, think about how much are we here doing something for ourselves versus what are we going to do with this meeting that goes beyond ourselves. Now the turn to Dick.
It's interesting that we've gone into some degree of complexity here, and what I see is it's pathetic, but it's beautiful all in the same breath, is that man is trying to reach God. And you see it in the great cathedrals of Europe or whatever. We build these great edifices because we're trying to reach God. Mm-hmm. It's a good thing, but it's pathetic in the sense that we're trying to do something that we can't do with a building, But I think this is a good thing. I don't think it's a bad thing. We're trying to reach God, and that's what we're trying to do right here. I mean, we're all trying to reach the divine.
But this is I think so as well. When I read this story, I wondered whether the direction of their building was the right direction to reach God. They thought they had to build until they reached the heaven.
Right.
And to make themselves, to make them a name, a great name. And this is, Elisa, how I understood you. We are enjoying this conference, telling our friends how great we were in Israel and how important people we met, making us a name. And maybe we should use, it's a little bit pathetic as well. Maybe the bricks are not for building towers, but for building bridges, seriously.
Yeah.
And so this is not a vertical building, this is a horizontal building. And maybe if we would reach our Rea, so our comrade. So this is the way how we come closer to God, maybe in some extent.
me
Wayne
it's
and
I'm sorry.
Shabtai and Tim.
To me, it's a composite because we have what was said before. Genesis says very clearly that what they are to do is fill the earth. These people have decided what they want to do is get together. In other words, their intent was to get together to make themselves great and to accomplish it through a certain means, that is, to have a city and to have a tower. I think it's a combination of things going on here. And I don't think it's a single, I don't think it's a positive. I think it's a negative. I think that's why it keeps saying what it does. That what we try to do sometimes is go our own way, not God's way, to establish our own purposes and not God's purpose. And in order to do that, God sees that as something that is actually harmful for what his purposes are. And because of that, then he confounds them so that they can't go do those things that are actually against themselves. Because if it's for themselves and not in his agreement, then it's actually not a good thing. I think that's what's going on in it. That's my idea.
Yeah, great, thank you.
A linguistic point that I think is very significant, it goes with Brother John said. If you take Jacob's ladder, it says Rosho Magia Hashamayma. It's very similar meaning, but the language is totally different. Rosho Magia Hashamayma, Jacob's ladder. Hashamayma means reaches towards heaven. The structure of hay at the end of the word means towards. Here it's not so, even though the translation, both the English and what is the Luther's translation, said it will reach to heaven, it's not the Hebrew. It says Rosho Bashamayim, the head will be in heaven. Let us make a tower that his head will be in heaven. The translator thought that if we say that the head will be at the heaven, meaning we start from the bottom and the head will be in heaven, so it will reach towards heaven. But this is an interpretation. That's not the meaning. Where is our beginning? Our beginning is where we start growing from the head down or from the feet up. I mean, the people. I think that Rosh in Hebrew means the beginning also, the head and the beginning. So it can mean that the beginning is in heaven. And I think it's the idea of this tower is not something that we interpret this text, not from the text, but from the way we know how you build towers. If you see a high-rise building, so how do we start it? They start at the bottom and they build it up. But maybe they had a totally different vision. And I like when you said it's a concept, it was something in the imagination. They said, let's do something that will start in heaven, Rosho Bashamayim, the beginning will be in the heaven, and it will reach us down. It will build it downwards, towards us. And then we build a bridge, but the bridge is not horizontal, the bridge is vertical between us and heaven.
Yeah.
Tim and John?
Pardon me. What I'm wondering is why they're afraid of being scattered. Because that seems to assume there's somebody else out there who could threaten them, but the whole world. We're told at the beginning, this is everybody, and yet there's this fear of being scattered. And it seems to me that this is, and maybe I'm getting this from Andreas, but there's a totalitarianism about this project. Let's get everybody together, get organized, get on the same page, wear the same hat, we'll brand ourselves, because there's somebody out there who's threatening us. And I'm wondering if, there seem to be two different assumptions working here. This is the whole world, or there's, and it seems to me that impulse is based on fear. And
it could be a fear of being alone. If we scatter ourselves, we won't have the strength.
Let's hear what
Is there someone out there that's threatening us, or are we threatening ourselves?
But we construct an enemy.
Because we're afraid of diversity. When I'm thinking of one language, there's a famous dialogue between Heidegger and a Japanese scholar. I think you're talking about the Note language. I don't know. And the Japanese were very interested in understanding Heidegger. And at a point in the conversation, the Japanese scholar says to Heidegger, I don't know how to say Dasein in Japanese. And Heidegger as much as says, Dasein is something you say in German. It may not be sayable in Japanese. And what I'm thinking here, in light of what you said was emptiness, can we say what is meant in Japanese and the Zen tradition by emptiness? Or is there something that comes out of the meaning of that word and that tradition that's unescapable or not fully captured within English? So the question is, if we are looking at one language to build bridges between different faith experiences, that even if they come out of silence are expressed in words, is it possible that the words in which these are expressed have some incommensurability between them, so that part of our dialogue with the idea of one language carries with it the implicit danger of assimilation, to level things down into a language that we all use. And the danger of assimilation is that we end up not protecting and respecting the differences between us. So then the question is, when we talk about one language, can we have one language which allows for maybe nodes in which there are incommensurabilities of meaning? I think we normally think of a language as a system of words and meanings in which there are meanings in common, cross-links between all the words in the language. But maybe that's not the kind of language we're hunting for.
So, okay, John, and then let's shift a little bit and look for another expression of, for another kind of language.
Well, I'm just thinking, if we see it as the one language and the one intent is not the problem, it's that they didn't scatter was the problem, but instead they built a tower, and if we were to draw the similarity, perhaps we could say the text is warning us against the ivory tower. And academia that develops its own language and it stays here. But the point of the passage is, it's not the language that's the problem. It's taking the language to the world. So it's taking the learnings here and dispersing them into different parts of the world from which we have all come. Just as it is.
I'm going to give you a high five on that.
Can I just quickly respond to that?
Okay.
I mean, the only thing that, I mean, I like that. The only thing that doesn't work with the text, that project is called Babel. And Babel is not a good thing in the Bible. So that, that's why it's not just about taking something out of the ivory tower into the world, but since we're really talking about something that has the notion of, or carries the notion of violence, of oppression, something that creates exile and suffering, kind of that sort of sticks to that text somehow, and doesn't really want to go away when you read that.
Don't let a linguist ruin a good interpretation.
I know. This is absolutely great. I think you get a taste what we experienced in Wittenberg last year. It should be some kind of appetizer, and the Latin word textus means something that is woven, some kind of fabric or carpet or so. And Umberto Eco, in his famous book, The Open Work, says actually we are the one who are weaving this textus on and on. So this is not, and this is actually what we did right here. And I wonder whether this works with another textus that Brahmachari will introduce to us. And well, let's start with this. You have another sheet with you. This is...
Yes. No rituals. Now we don't have a clue.
So now I'm testing your Sanskrit. All of your undergraduate Sanskrit courses are going to come to bear now.
I missed that day.
So, I don't want to presume where this kind of thing might fit in the overall scheme of what Axel is trying to do. But I think it's an interesting exercise, as he says, to try and apply the group mind that has not had a tradition of engaging with this text to this text, to see what can come of it. If I introduce the Bhagavad Gita very quickly, and then basically, for Hindus, on the battle of there was a battle between two sides of one family. One side that was erring, that had gone down the road, a road that was leading the entire country into turmoil, and a few of the brothers that said that it's gotten bad enough, and they tried time and time again to avoid conflict. But the bigger side, that was the wrong side, or the side rather that was choosing adharma, the opposite of dharma, they would not refuse. They would not come to table. They would not sit down and talk, etc., etc. It degenerated into the battle. The protagonist in this is Arjuna, who is representing humanity, at least in our understanding, and he goes into the middle of the battlefield with his charioteer, who is Krishna. Who is Krishna is a big old thing, but basically he is seeing the choice that he has in front of him. He either stands with dharma, and then as a warrior he will have to kill his own family members, or he takes the family as more important than being right or being in the right, and lets everybody go and just says, I'm not going to kill anybody and just let them do what they want. It's better that way. So Krishna here, and this is where the translation that I have for you is a little bit unhelpful. Krishna can at once be God himself, but also the mouth of Dharma. So this is where if I'm talking specifically to Dialog here, if you can transpose this anthropomorphized being with what Dharma might look like if it was personified, this is where some of the meaning might be a little bit more relatable. So basically we have here a couple of verses from the Bhagavad Gita where God is speaking to us through Arjuna. And there's no narrative in this one, but this is just to see what your opinions are, what thoughts come up, and whether we can get
this
anything.
This is also in the war. These two verses are in the war.
So the war is about to start, and this conversation happens just before the war, to help somebody who is extremely confused about what they should be doing in that situation. Can I ask everybody just to mark in a comma? If you look at the first little block, the end of that verse, it says, in accordance with authentic faith. If you just put a comma after the me, comma, and then in accordance with authentic faith.
Okay, sure.
Thank you.
We actually thought we could read it line by line, but I don't know if the print is
the print wasn't preserved. Okay, we can divvy this up pretty easy. If you follow along with your pen, and you could just mark in a pause for me. So, I alone give a devoted person the steadfast faith, pause, to worship me, pause, in whatever form he desires to worship me, and that comma is there, in accordance with authentic faith. The next one, absorbed in thoughts of me, that comma is right, with their lives dedicated to me, that comma is right. Devoted persons will enlighten each other, pause, by describing their views about me, is what that should say, and thus they will find joy. Yeah, that's fine. So that should be fine.
So we read either from pause to comma, or from comma to comma, or from comma to pause, and do it
any language you like.
Any language you want.
Exactly.
And we read it. We finished the last round so that everyone has read once.
The Almighty Lord said,
I alone give a devoted person the steadfast faith
to worship me in whatever form he desires to worship me,
in accordance with authentic faith,
absorbed in thoughts of me,
with their lives dedicated to me.
Devoted persons will enlighten each other
by describing their views on me,
and thus they will find both satisfaction and joy.
The Almighty Lord said,
I alone give a devoted person the steadfast faith,
to worship me.
In whatever form he desires to worship me.
In accordance with authentic faith.
Absorbed in thoughts of me.
With their lives dedicated to me.
Devoted persons will enlighten each other.
Other by describing their views on me.
and thus they will find both satisfaction and joy.
So, I wondered your initial reactions, and then we'll get a direction on where we're going.
Can we hear it in the original?
Yeah. Can you hear it in the original?
Do you mind?
I don't mind. No, not at all. I always love when we have 2,500-year-old texts to kind of hear as well. So the first verse goes, Yo yo yam yam tanum bhakta shraddhaya arjitamichhati tasya tasya chalam shraddham tameva vidadhamyaham. That's the first one. Second. Majjitta madgata prana bodhayanta parasparam kathayantascha mam nityam tushyanti charamanti cha. Is the second one. Yes.
There's a certain cadence to the way, almost in a chant form.
Yes.
It must always be read that way.
Correct. There's a very long text on prosody and meter and poetic meter, and so this is the Anushtup verse. It's it's an easy type of meter so that you can remember these kinds of things. Normally, you would remember all 742 verses of the Gita by the time you were about 10 or 11. Yeah.
I see a tension between in whatever form he desires to worship versus authentic faith.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's true. And so the authentic bit in this is, again, you have to be aware of a lot of the textures of that word in Sanskrit. And authentic means actually justifiable. And when I say justifiable, I mean something that has been subjected to the ancient practices of logic. It has to survive. Whatever your faith is, it has to survive going through a process of justification that is governed by logic. So if you tell me, I want to believe God is this glass, great. Tell me how you believe God is this glass. And we will sit there and go through all systems of logic and make sure that what your understanding is authentic. You could tell me that God is
self-contradictory, you mean?
Yeah, it cannot be self-contradictory, and it cannot have any of the logical flaws. There are 64 main logical flaws that you can have. Yeah.
But
yes.
The contradiction here is, of course, that in whatever form he desires, as long as he is as form he desires, so why I alone give a devoted person? Means if it's logically sustainable,
yeah.
So what the Lord gives the power to make a logic deduction, or he permits a person to follow his logic deduction.
So this is it. He permits somebody to worship God in whatever way he finds useful to him, so long as it is logically sound. So
give means give a permission.
Yeah. Gives a permission, but also gives the strength in the faith. So it's a devotional faith.
John and Daija, you also want? Okay.
Can the logic allow for contradictions and paradox?
Yes.
What I'm thinking, for example, is in a number of the hymns of the Orthodox tradition, I've never found as much in the Western tradition, there's this interplay of sort of men and death. So you find hymns, today he who holds the world in his hands is hung upon a tree. He who brought forth all things into being today lies in a manger. And the point of those hymns in being chanted is not so much to subject them to logic, but to open up to worship.
Yeah.
So but what you're talking about with logic can allow for that paradox.
Exactly.
Okay.
You have here the words worship come up, and you're thinking, well, logic, worship. How do those two work together?
So the logic doesn't have to be linear in that sense.
Right.
Thank you.
I'm just wondering if you could say something about the Sanskrit that's translated as desire.
Okay, so ichati. Ichati is a desire, a type of desire that can either be born of sensory desires or a longing. And we would take this more as a longing, and longing is described as a longing that is felt deep from within, rather than, today I desire to worship God as the one who will save me from X problem, and tomorrow I want to worship God as the one who will give me the winning number on the lottery ticket. That's not what we're looking for, I think, in this verse. I think he's calling for what is this deep longing that you have. In accordance with that, if it is justifiable, we will give you the faith that you need to sustain that desire.
Can I say something?
Yeah,
because what I notice is steadfastness, desire, and accordance. There seems to be an alignment with the Dharma.
Yeah, definitely. This is all about getting the correct alignment of those three features. Perfect. Yeah.
Okay, I told you I've spent some time in the Gita the last couple of years, and I know nothing more probably than 2 years ago, but it just perplexes me over and over and over. But when I see this, I'm trying to get my mind back to that Jack Hawley translation, and I'm thinking about the idea of worship. So I'm going back to John's point earlier, that I bring my own framework into what that word means. So fully aware of that, worship, in my understanding of it, can only happen when I get to the depths of my own senses and feelings. Jiva, I think. So in that, does this not presume, I alone give a devoted person the steadfast faith to worship me. Okay, that presumes some access to the jiva, right? I may be using that incorrectly, but that's my understanding of it. So that the first part of the sentence assumes this knowledge of the Atma, the true self, that only then am I given over. So I would think that the second part, again, this is a layman's understanding, okay? But my thought is, a devoted person is given this faith because the devotion. Golly, now I'm going to have a tendency to do a cause and effect, which is not necessarily helpful. But the devotion in my mind is already. It's already. And so since it's already, then this the faucet is on and the flowing is happening, leading to the second piece. Okay, that's, again, I struggle here.
I like what you said with that. I mean, the first part of what you said with regards to worship, it's very, very important to understand the contours of worship can be different depending on what era of development of Hinduism you're in. This time, worship had three major connotations. The first connotation was constant meditation. So a meditation of the Supreme, of Brahman or of Dharma, a meditation that was unbroken. So it's constant fixated meditation. Number two, a devotional reverence. A devotional reverence that is displayed either ritually or with one's own actions of humility, etc., before the universe, etc., and those kinds of things. And the third one was a worship that is not done in a ritual setting, not done in a mental setting, but done with your actions. So worship of this kind can also be feeding somebody that's poor, arranging schooling for an orphan, all those kinds of things can be worship if they're done with that devotion that is already stated at the beginning. And that brings me to the second part of what I was going to say, which was, if you boil this down, he's saying that I give the devotion to somebody who's devoted, who I've given devotion to, who is devoted, who I've given devotion to.
That's.
And then you get to hear a little bit about how Dharma deals with time.
So good.
It's eternal. Time is eternal. We don't. One of the tensions with calling us monotheists, I think, that people feel is that they're looking for a creator. Yeah. We don't have a creator. But we do say that the source that gives rise to everything here is one. And that source does this. Does this. All the time. I think we're on the 28th cycle of this one, if we're going on onto that kind of level of detail. And so it's, if you've ever heard the term panentheism, this is definitely more towards panentheism, I think, in that way. And so here, this makes a lot more sense to kind of people who have that time background. Because, yeah, the devotion is there, but I think what he's trying to qualify is that it can't be something that's not authentic. And when it says not authentic, not in line with traditional teaching. I think that's where we are. Yeah.
What is this?
What is this? We have sarga, emanation, and pratisarga, which is closing of the emanation, which is contraction. So it's emanation and contraction.
Yeah. So we have Andreas, we have Wayne, and we have Shabtai, and I think Ricardo. Yes, of course. We have 6 minutes, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4.
I can give brief. I can shut the answer.
Okay.
Yeah.
You just answered my first question, what the authentic faith is, so that's in accordance with tradition. Then the second one would have been satisfaction. How is that different from joy? I mean, what's the who is satisfied by what?
There is a curiosity about the other and otherness that, when satisfied, gives you joy. You could look at it in that way. The curiosity, if it is a curiosity born of fear or mistrust, when solved, brings joy. Why satisfaction and joy? If that satisfaction leads to joy. The satisfaction is that our mind is all of that bounciness that was going on in our brains about the otherness is calmed down, and the joy is felt in the heart.
Thank you. Late in the game, but nonetheless a clarification.
Yeah.
Because if I understood you correctly, you were actually articulating the idea of Aristotle's third law of logic. It seemed to me you were saying that.
Yeah.
So you can you accept a paradox as I would, but you would not accept an antinomy. Then you really don't see a true contradiction.
It's not.
It's a paradoxical statement.
It's a paradoxical statement. It's not true contradiction, because this text also has this the status of being one of the foremost means of cognition that we have. So the three places for learning things. You've got your direct perception, inference, and testimony. This would be the highest form of testimony.
Well, that's a good clarification.
Yeah.
The amazing thing I find here, without the explanations that you gave me, it's something that relates to the story, and that's how you reach a decision. You know there are two possible ways. They're both equally possible. So how do you make a decision? And you make a decision through devotion and joy. This somehow, because intellectually everything could be, as long as it's that logically contradictory, so it's okay. So, but you have to reach one decision. Finally, you have to decide. So could it be that the Lord gives you the way, the decision through devotion and like it's affirmed with a sense of joy.
That is a wonderful point. For example, within Buddhism and Hinduism, there are minute differences that turn into cosmic differences, yet they can stay in the same kingdom for one reason. The Buddhist Dharma is well defended logically. The Vedanta or the Hindu Dharma is well defended logically. And because they can both logically state their positions to the king will give them equal ways to live in the country, and the people will allow them to live in the country because their practices are both harmonious, in that they're both living dharmically. They both do things that look similar in some way or some form, but because they're logically defensive, there is logical defense behind what they're doing, it's fine. If it's illogical, irrational,
then they can talk to each other.
Then you gotta think a little bit more about your logic before the king gives you support. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So we have 2.5 minutes, Ricardo, and then by Jaku, and then we'll close this session.
One thing that it's like impression of a first time reader, on the 10:9, that absorbed in thoughts of me with their lives dedicated to me, devoted person, real life. And so one thing that got me thinking is that if you think about something and you act upon this, it means that this something is very important to you, that it's very dear to you, that's where you spend your energy in, and so the impression that I get is that, well, that's the you prove yourself with your actions, and then you get the reward accordingly, or reward, or you get your life accordingly. I mean, that's my impression of a first reader.
Is that contradictory to what you would think of normally?
No. That's I just wanted to say how my impression about reading text.
I think that's one valid interpretation.
Yes. I just wanted to confirm with you that logic is devotion.
Yes.
I just
Yes.
wanted to mention.
Yes. The desire to kind of mentally flesh out what you're knowing it does show a good level of devotion, that you are trying to figure out the applicability of what you're dealing with, whether it aligns with what you're dealing with or not, and whether it gives you a sense of purpose or renews your sense of purpose rather. So the logical examination of texts, it's definitely features a lot more in the East, because we can feel, for us here, we can feel Krishna speaking to us directly, if we engage with the text in that way.
Thank you so much. Thank all of you for this.
Thank you. That's beautiful. I would like to call upon Rav Shlomo Shefer, who is the campus rabbi in Bar Ilan, to share with us his experience